Hey guys, Ken Smith. This is part 2 of my conversation with Texas Park and Wildlife invasive species biologist John Findeisen. I may have screwed that up, but basically John's job is to oversee the team for all of Texas that helps control invasive species, specifically aquatic invasive species. So all the questions you have about spraying, about how they get paid, what they're spraying, where they're spraying, John handles all that. Got a lot of great questions. I think every question that was asked in the comments of the first video gets covered at some point in all of these videos. But again, if you have questions, let us know. Let's jump right to the video. Today we're going to cover, well, basically more of the same stuff, just at a deeper level. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about what they are spraying. So check it out, guys.
So we wanted to know what herbicides were actually having the most detrimental impact on that plant, especially the torpedo grass. I worked with Todd on it. I don't figure out what the original, what the habitat was in Lowe's Creek, so that way we could go back and simulate that elsewhere. So working with Todd, we ended up setting up a little experiment over at Needmore Point there. We went in and used our different herbicides that we'd been using to treat Salvenia, and found out that glyphosate was actually the herbicide that was killing the Salvenia, or not only Salvenia, but the torpedo grass. Torpedo grass was pulling that in and then circulating that down to the root and wiping it completely out. The other herbicides we used in our spray plots, within 2 weeks, those plots, the torpedo grass was coming right back. It wasn't as thick as it had been, but it was coming back.
So I'm assuming you literally went in and said, you marked off an area and said, we're going to treat that with this, and
exactly. We had that with we took an airboat, set it in torpedo grass. We had 5 different color pool noodles that we had just cut little sections off, anchored those, and then dropped them in each corner. And then, that's what it was. As simple as it was, we learned what we needed to. Now, unfortunately, Rayburn caught 3.5, 4 feet of water. That was in the spring of 2017, and it flooded those sites out, flooded the torpedo grass. So we had no idea where our sites were other than a GPS coordinate. But, we lost the ability to monitor that. So at that time, then we took and we pulled glyphosate out of the picture for Toledo Bend. We knew that was having major impacts on non-target species that we didn't want. So we pulled that out. We're no longer going to use glyphosate. Our other option here is now going to be diquat. The diquat treatments in the study over at Rayburn, that was one of them where the torpedo grass came back, and we had the new shoots growing after 2 weeks above the water. Now everything below the water was still green, except for that glyphosate treatment.
Interesting.
So at that point, we were still doing lake-wide treatments. Going back to your original question of, how many acres are we at? So we were looking at a lot of that stuff. We were going in, we had backed off just using a contact herbicide throughout the whole year. Went in and started looking at the same time we were releasing weevils in areas, Howson Bay, 6 Mile, some of those areas on Toledo Bend, the giant Salvinia weevil. And this is a species-specific weevil that targets giant Salvinia. You can take the weevil, handfuls of it, throw it into Whole Foods. I don't recommend it, but you can do it. And it's going to starve to death. It only eats Salvinia. So we had some weevils in there. Went in and looked. We had decent weevil numbers in there that we felt might be able to control it. So we asked the question, okay, and it was about this time that the Hydrilla had disappeared out of Howson. That was in spring of 18. We'll get to our thoughts on that later. But our ideas were, okay, let's see what happens if we quit spraying. So that the last time Howson was treated with any herbicides was in December of 2019. So it's been over 2 years with it. So we looked at that and we're like, okay, let's go ahead and go from Martinez Creek north. We will do treatments. Anything south of Martinez, Patroon south, we're not going to treat at all. We're going to see if we can't let the weevils do this work for us.
And by the way, guys,
heavy lifting.
So for those
and to this day, we've been successful.
So for those of you who don't know Toledo Bend, I'm going to say Martinez is 15 miles, maybe more than that above housing. Would you say that sounds right?
I think so. Roughly, it's above the 147 bridge, and Martinez is Cove north of Patroon.
Yeah, Martinez is way up there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we have contractors working from Martinez all the way up through the North Toledo Bend WMA, and they're spraying the contact herbicide. Anything south of that, if it needed to be sprayed, Parks and Wildlife would do it. So that went on for a couple of years, and we really got to watching our Salvinia numbers, or numbers of acres being treated. So last year we decided, September of September of 2022, or not 2022, that's ahead, but 2020, we went in and now have the contractors working every other week on, and it's only one boat working every other week from Martinez, and we had to pull them into Patroon this last year because we had some large Salvinia mats way in the back end of it. But I mean, for the most part, they're working that upper 40% or upper half of the reservoir. And our philosophy was, if we kill it up there, if we kill Salvinia up there, it can never, be a problem down south. So, and we're going to continue to push farther and farther north, and see, on this, if maybe we get it down to 4 or 5 coves where we heavily manage the Salvinia with spraying, but then everything south, we're able to use the Weevils. Now, the bad problem with the Weevils, well, let me back up just a little bit. So we went from over 5,000 acres 6 years ago to this last year, we sprayed 1,700 acres total. And it was only in that upper section of the reservoir.
And I would assume there are instances where you sprayed the same acre over and over.
Well, but right, exactly. You're covering that same acre on a map, but it's Salvinia growing. I mean, we're talking about a plant that can double in size in 7 to 10 days. So, mats that were hidden by buckbrush that got blown out by wind or rainfall event, right. And then they went and landed on that same bank. So they were spraying. And the contractors have been instructed they're only to spray mats of Salvinia.
I'm going to pause for a second. I've got to go to a better location. Okay, guys, sorry about that. We had to take a little break. I had to move downstairs to get closer to my internet system. You saw you're getting a little bit of jumpy video. So, John, you were saying about spraying.
Right. That, in 2016, we're somewhere 5,400 acres of Salvinia, treated annually on Toledo Bend. And, here we are 6 years later, and we're treating 1,700 acres annually on Toledo Bend. And we've been able to utilize the Weevils in the southern end of it with our cold weather event last year. And one of the things, let me back up a little bit, is Salvinia is more tolerant of cold weather than what the Weevil is. So, in that real cold weather event we had last year, one of my biggest, concerns was coming out of this, did we lose every Weevil that we had stocked prior to this? And as it turns out, we ended up finding Weevils in housing at levels high enough to maintain control, actually to kill the Salvinia a month after that freeze. What we look for is 35 adult Salvinia Weevils per kilogram of Salvinia, and that will control it. LSU's estimates on that would be somewhere along the lines of 600,000 Weevils to control an acre of Salvinia 1 layer thick. So, we've been able to use multiple tools here in the toolbox to maintain control of Salvinia at Toledo Bend.
John, I've never done a video with a guy while I'm sitting in bed, but what the heck, it's closest I can possibly get. So, I found this really interesting. Talk about how you check for Weevils. Well, first off, you made a comment to me in our first phone call. What temperature kills Salvinia?
So, if once it gets down below in the teens, the 20s or air temp, the Salvinia will die on the reservoirs. We saw that back in, was that 2018? We had the real cold weather for about 3 days here in Texas, and we lost roughly 95% of the Salvinia in the state that year as a result of that. Uh, Now, the one thing that happened in 18, and then we saw again, especially here this in two or what was that 2021, the snowpocalypse we had was there was some snow and some ice associated with that. So you got the lake that froze, and it froze that Salvinia. So there, the ice and snow itself may have provided some insulation and allowed some of that Salvinia to persist through. But my concern was the weevils. I knew we weren't going to get rid of the Salvinia, but I was just afraid that our weevil population, everything we had built up in the wild over the last 6 years or 5 years, was gone. And that wasn't the case. We found weevils all over, and they survived and did well here, at least in the southern part of East Texas. And we'll draw that line about center. Typically, anything north of center, a normal winter will push those weevil numbers back to the point they don't recover during the next Salvinia growing season. But with the winter we had last year, I mean, we're down to single digits or below zero in a lot of these places, and our weevils survived out of it, and they came out of it in strong enough numbers that we were able to still maintain that control of the Salvinia. So it could be too that what we're seeing now is, my fingers are crossed, a more cold tolerant weevil. We do have those weevils that we're rearing in our greenhouses and are slowly making that progression north to see exactly where, they will survive these winters. And, I don't want to put all the eggs in one basket and say, yeah, the weevils are the answer to it, because we know they're not the silver bullet. And we also know, as aggressive as Salvinia is, if we go in and we trust the weevils so much that, that's all we do up at Caddo Lake, we're going to lose control of it, and it'll go back to 6,000 acres like coverage like it was in 2017. I mean, that's half.
Okay.
Around 25,000 acres.
Okay.
It's roughly split in half. So 6,000 acres is about half of the surface area on the Texas side. So 50% of the Texas side of the reservoir was covered in Salvinia.
Wow.
And it wasn't just, one layer thick. Some of that stuff was several inches thick. It may have been 2 or 3 layers thick of Salvinia. And that's the one thing that we see, is that it will grow in stories. So, you come in, you spray it with herbicides, that Salvinia dies, and then you've got another layer that you've got to kill, and another layer that you've got to kill. And then, figure that that's doubling in size every 7 to 10 days. That was an uphill battle.
You got to really be on top of your spraying.
Right, exactly. And the thing, go ahead.
Well, finish your thought. I got another question.
I was just going to say, we are using the weevils, and Parks and Wildlife's approach in all of our vegetation management is to use an integrated pest management approach. And that's to use all the tools in the toolbox. That's going to be, chemicals, herbicides, a biological control, such as the giant Salvinia weevil. I think we're all familiar with, the use of grass carp in the state of Texas, whether we agree with it or not. That's another biological control. Now, the third component of that is going to be a mechanical control, and that can be as simple as reaching down and picking the Salvinia up, flipping it up on the bank, or bringing harvesters in. There was some harvesting work done. I don't remember the exact date, maybe a decade ago, up at Caddo Lake. And in the amount of time that it took the spray boats to spray 1,000 acres of it, the harvester only got 100 acres. So, it's kind of like cutting your yard with a pair of scissors. You just never catch up.
Right.
And a lot of our lakes, even the depth limitations at what the Salvinia grows are so shallow that you can't get a harvester up in there. Not to mention the fact that harvester would just be destroyed by the numerous stumps and everything else we have in our lakes.
I would think that would be really hard on one.
Yes.
So the weevils in Texas, you guys grew all of them, right? They're all originally grown in a greenhouse, either there in Brooklyn or at Caddo or other places.
Right. We have the Caddo Biocontrol Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization supported by Parks and Wildlife for growing weevils. Originally, it was just for weevils to be released at Caddo Lake. However, after 2018, when it got so cold up there wasn't enough Salvinia to release weevils on. So we were able to take those weevils and spread them out throughout the state. We also work with another partner, the Lower Neches Valley Authority. They have some canals, irrigation canals they move water through, and they have a lot of Salvinia in it. Well, they're far enough south in that Beaumont area that those weevils do well during the winter. We just went down, I guess, the week before last and picked up I want to say it was roughly somewhere 40,000 adult weevils out of one of their canals, and then moved those over to Sheldon Reservoir.
So talk about how you collect them and how you find them.
Collecting, it's just a matter of going out and, picking them up, or picking up the Salvenia, putting it into totes, and then transporting that tote of weevil infested Salvenia to another lake. Now, as far as counting, what we'll do is we'll take a sample of that, and typically that's a 5-gallon bucket. Generally that's 1.5 to 2 kilograms of weight of dry Salvinia. So we'll bring that bucket back, we'll dry that Salvinia out. We have I think it's a 15-quart salad spinner. We can put that Salvinia in and spin it real quick, get all the water out of it. And then we'll put the Salvinia into some galvanized funnels. And then there's alcohol in catch jars down below those funnels. So as that Salvinia dries out, the weevils fall down the funnel and then into the alcohol. And then we'll take those samples and then count the adult weevils as well as the larvae. Since we have a known weight at the beginning of it, of the dry Salvinia, then we have an actual ratio of number of weevils per kilogram of Salvinia.
That's crazy.
So it's roughly a 72-hour process, 48 to 72 hours to dry it out, just depending on how much Salvinia, how dense that is.
Yeah. All right, good. I just realized we talked a little bit about herbicides, but one of the things I found fascinating in our first conversation was the length of, once that stuff gets in the water, how long will it injure plants? How about that? All right, so that's part 2. Part 3 will be up next week. I think there's 4 or 5 parts, as I mentioned in one of the earlier parts. I think in the next part, or in part 4, one of the two is going to be something that's going to blow your mind about hydrilla growth in Texas and why it grows in other parts of the country where the water is even colder than it does in Texas. So stick around. This continues to get more and more interesting, guys.